My name is Heather McKenzie, and I am the Executive Director of Solar Alberta. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that I'm hosting you today from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including Nahiawak or Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Papaschase, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, and Métis, nations whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries. Today, we're going to be sharing 3 presentations with you, and following that, we'll be taking some time for a Q&A period with our presenters. Throughout the event and after, you are encouraged to give us a shout out on social media using hashtag SolarAlberta. We'll be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box, so please enter the questions in the Q&A section. You should be able to click on that section in your Zoom toolbar. You can upvote good questions that others have asked and post some of your own. The questions that are voted up will show up at the top of the list, and we will be pulling primarily from those for the moderated Q&A, as we likely won't have time for all questions. And now a little bit about Solar Alberta. Did you know this is Solar Alberta's 30th year of operation? Solar Alberta is a not-for-profit society that is dedicated to public education about renewable energy and energy efficiency. We also serve as a hub for the solar industry here in Alberta and connect the general public to industry providers through our solar industry directory, our Alberta solar map, our regular events, and much more. On April 28th, we will be hosting our annual general meeting. I'd like to invite you all to sign up as Solar Alberta members, attend, and elect your new board. There are a few vacancies to fill on the board this year, and these are often highly competitive positions. If you're interested in applying to serve on the board, all of the instructions and application form are available at solaralberta.ca. The deadline for board applications is April 13th. We're pleased to have launched our annual solar seminar series online this year and have found that this venue is making our programming accessible to folks from many walks of life. We are offering a number of webinars on Thursdays over the lunch hour between now and September. You can find archived videos of our previous webinars on our website. We are currently accepting registrations for our May 13th event, at which we will learn more about the City of Edmonton's energy transition strategy and climate action plan. We're always interested in developing more partnerships for our events. If you or your company want to work with us to educate the public about the benefits of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate change, please don't hesitate to reach out. This entire series is free and open to the public thanks to the generous support of our members, volunteers, and financial supporters. We are pleased and grateful to have Solus Energy Consulting as the premium sponsor for this Lunch and Learn event, and their dancing skills as well. Looking good, Paula. Before we turn to our presenters and introductions, our presenters are wanting to get a sense of who all is in the room today. We're going to launch a little poll here. Just tell us how you spend your time. It's about your careers, your jobs, but also just wanting to get a sense of who our audience is. So please complete this poll, and we will then share the results so that our presenters know a little bit about who's in the audience today. Thanks. I see your responses coming in. Oh, we're a little bit all over the place. That's good. I suspected we might be. So we've got some folks who are utility scale solar industry professionals here. We've got some microgen folks on the line. I didn't doubt that, given that a good chunk of our membership are within the microgen world. Got some community generators, some solar curious folks in the general public, EV industry folks, and of course, some government folks. I had no doubt they would show up today to hear from these wonderful presenters. So great to see a good mix, a good healthy mix of attendees. Lorraine, do you want to share the poll results? I think we could show off to everybody. So the majority of you are actually in the other category, so that's good to know. So we've got some really interesting mix of attendees on the line today. We're going to hopefully have a little something for everyone in our presentation. in our 3 presentations. Here we go. So our 3 presenters today. First up, we've got JP Jep. JP has focused his career on climate change and low carbon energy. His list of previous roles includes Senior Advisor on Climate Change to the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Corporate Lead on Climate Change Regulation for an integrated oil company, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for the largest carbon offset producer in Canada, Director of Energy Transitions for an integrated electric utility, and Regulatory Coordinator for the first integrated carbon capture and storage project in Canada. He has a 20-year career working with forward-looking companies, governments, and other stakeholders. JP is now principal of Nexus Climate and Energy Strategy, a small consultancy focused on climate change and energy transition. Welcome, JP. Thanks for joining us. Following JP's presentation, we're going to hear from Paula McGarrigle. She is a professional with over 20 years of experience in the energy sector in North America. The majority of her experience has been in the renewable energy sector. Paula is the co-founder of Solus Energy Consulting, our sponsors today. Her experience includes project development, climate change, business development, and strategic planning. Paula was previously the head of Shell Wind Energy for Canada and started the Suncor Alternative and Renewable Energy Group. Paula's academic background includes 2 undergraduate degrees from the University of Alberta, a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry, and a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering. In addition, Paula holds an MBA in Finance from Queen's University. Paula is a member of APEGA and the Canadian Renewable Energies Association. She was invited by the British High Commission to work on sustainability as part of the 2002 G8 Summit and has been a participant in the National Roundtable on Energy and the Environment. Welcome, Paula. Thanks for joining us today. And our last speaker today is Maureen Kola. Dr. Maureen Kola is Director of Renewable Energy within the Clean Resource Division of Alberta INNOVATES. She leads the Renewable and Alternative Energy Program and is responsible for leading initiatives, developing partnerships, evaluating technologies, and managing projects ranging from applied research to technology demonstration. She works closely with industry, technology developers, government, and other stakeholders to advance grid modernization and electricity generation technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and diversify Alberta's economy. Maureen has a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Alberta and received her MSc and PhD from Ryerson University. Maureen is an avid outdoor enthusiast and an accomplished skier, hiker, and cyclist. When not working, you will find her seeking adventures in the mountains. And so welcome, Maureen. Thank you as well for joining us today. Now I'm going to turn over the mic and the slide deck to JP, and he will take it from here.
Okay, thanks Heather for the nice introduction. I'm still going up the technology learning curves like everybody else. Can you hear me? Can you see the slide deck? Yes? All right, success. So we've only got a few minutes for each presenter. I've got 9 slides worth of content. This is the sort of topic where we could talk for literally an afternoon on it. So it's been pretty hard to condense everything into just a few slides. So please forgive me for going on a whistle-stop tour through some of this. At the very last slide, I've got an email address and phone number if you'd like to call, or of course we can chat about that at the end during the Q&A part. So first of all, we're going to talk about the clean fuel regulations. That's getting an awful lot of interest lately, the federal space. And then after the clean fuel regulations, talk about what I would call a huge opportunity now, stacking. So stacking with provincial offsets or federal offsets and other programming. And then very lastly, next steps. So to dive right in, so the Clean Fuel Regulations, Canada Gazette 1 was published just before Christmas in December. It's after 5 years or so of, well, 4 years of consultation. So it's taken a while. It's going to cover liquid fossil fuels in Canada. So gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, kerosene, fuel oils. So right now we're between Canada Gazette 1 and Canada Gazette 2. Canada Gazette 2 we published in December of this year. Obligated parties and producers will then be under the regulation in December 2022. And the way it works is the obligated parties are producers and importers of retail liquid fuels. And the intent is to reduce the greenhouse gases across each of the life cycles for each of those retail fuels. Without getting too deep into the numbers, although these are a lot of numbers, it's starting off in 2021 with a baseline. Then when it comes into force in 2022, there'll be an obligation for obligated parties to reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of those liquid fuels. Across the full 10 years out to 2030, there will overall be a 12 gram per 12 grams of CO2e per megajoule by 2030. Obligated parties will have an annual reduction requirement based upon the net amount of each fuel used, and it'll be calculated on a company basis. The real important thing to know here is that obligation is not via showing the carbon intensity of the actual fuels that are put out to market. Credits are the vehicle for compliance, or the currency for compliance. And there are 3 categories of credits and opportunities for projects to generate credits under each of these categories. Slide. So what are those 3 categories? Number 1, compliance credits under category 1. So category 1 compliance pathway is an action somewhere along the life cycle of the liquid fuel to reduce the carbon intensity of the liquid fuel. So an example would be attaching a cogen unit somewhere along the pathway from geology through to gas tank, attaching behind the fence renewables, spoiler, we're going to get into that in a second, attaching a carbon capture and storage project somewhere along that pathway. So by attaching those, it would by proxy reduce the carbon intensity. So the project must reduce the carbon intensity of the fossil fuel. The reductions are quantified using a quantification methodology, which is not an awful like a quantification protocol that we use to in Alberta. And although there is no regulatory obligation for gaseous or solid fuels under the clean fuel regulations any longer, there is, however, an opportunity for both gaseous and solid fuel pathways to generate credits. So for Canada Gazette 2, there's going to be 5 different quantification methodologies ready to go: carbon capture and storage, low carbon intensity electricity integration, I bolded there because this one's important for solar, co-processing of biocrudes, enhanced oil recovery, and a catch-all generic methodology. So the opportunity here under category 1 compliance credits for CFR for solar would be integration of behind the fence electricity. As an example, putting a few megawatts worth of facility on buffer lands surrounding a petrochemical complex. Again, we're going to go through this pretty quickly. Under category 2 compliance credits for CFR, this is about low carbon fuels actually going into the market. As an example, ethanol, biodiesel, HDRD, hydrogen. So the important thing here is that those low carbon fuels will go through a life cycle assessment, and the lower the carbon density of the low carbon fuel, the greater volume of credits it will generate. So it incents low carbon fuel providers to provide lowest carbon intensity fuels to market. For solar, the opportunity here is reducing the life cycle greenhouse gases of those low carbon biofuels. As an example, attaching a solar facility to biodiesel production. Again, it's behind the fence. Solar to hydrogen for transport fuels. And thirdly, category 3 compliance credits are known as fuel switching. So proponents generate credits via enabling a fuel switch of transportation vehicles. As an example, network EV charging and hydrogen fueling station. And here again, The lower the carbon intensity of the low carbon fuel, i.e. electricity or hydrogen, the greater the volume of credits it will generate. So the opportunity here for solar is in reducing the carbon intensity of that electricity or of hydrogen. So a solar to hydrogen, a wind to hydrogen would be two good examples here. So the opportunity stacking. Projects that allow compliance with or that generate credits in a provincial carbon pricing system, like Alberta offsets or Alberta EPCs, are also able to generate clean fuel regulation credits. As well, projects that receive government funding can also still generate clean fuel regulation credits. And together, if you were to stack together a provincial offset credit and a federal clean fuel regulation credits, yeah, most proponents are thinking as we get closer to 2030, that could be a $200 to $300 per ton revenue. So as an example here, it could be, we've got stacking here. We have, of course, the product sales, the electricity, clean fuel regulation credit, offset credit, potentially some program funding through different avenues. The facility could lower greenhouse gas emissions and therefore reduce compliance. And on top of that, some ESG positives. So as an example here, a refining facility with behind the fence solar would see all these benefits. And now we'll just talk really briefly one side per for each of these others. So spoke about stacking with provincial offset credits. Of course, those provincial offset credits are underneath the tier regulation, Technology Innovation and Emissions Reductions Regulation. Facilities that reduce their emissions beyond their facility-specific benchmark can generate emission performance credits. If there's facilities that are not regulated, i.e. solar, i.e. wind, they can also generate credits for offsets and sell it to obligated parties. So the opportunity for solar under tier is, of course, reducing facility greenhouse gas emissions and therefore generating EPCs or offset credits. And again, these can be stacked with that federal CFS credit. And then federally, the federal government just published the regulation for the federal offset system, known as the Greenhouse Gas Offset System Regulation. Just a few weeks ago, it was published. This is for parties that are regulated underneath the federal output-based pricing system. So that's not Alberta facilities. And offsets from provincial systems and protocols that are recognized federally can also be utilized for federal compliance. So we can generate provincial-based credits here and sell them to federally regulated parties. And projects that are registered in another program that provides credits for greenhouse gas emission reductions, example, clean fuel regulations, will not be eligible to register in the federal offset system. So you can stack a provincial credit and a federal clean fuel regulation credit, but you cannot stack a federal offset with a federal CFR. It's something to keep in mind when looking at opportunities. And then lastly, again, just before Christmas, it was a busy quarter for Environment Canada. They published a brand new federal climate change plan called A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy. They've identified in that plan 5 pillars where they want to deliver greenhouse gas reductions or incremental greenhouse gas reductions. And in there, there's numerous opportunities for programming and for potential funding. As an example, under Pillar 2, which is transportation electricity, they've identified $964 million for renewables and grid modernization. There's a $5 billion earmarked by Canada Infrastructure Bank, and something called the Net Zero Accelerator, which is the $3 billion. But perhaps most importantly, it's the now infamous trajectory on carbon pricing up to $170 per ton by 2030. And for the very last slide, yeah, next steps are from here. for folks that are really interested in what the opportunities for those regulations could bring, look into them a little bit deeper and think outside the box. So it's not just about generating low carbon electricity. There might be greater opportunity in joining together different project configurations, like solar to hydrogen, and look for that stacking opportunity. That's my end.
Great. Thank you, JP. Maureen, do you want to steal the slide deck from here? Or no, it was Paula next. Sorry. Yeah, Paula's got the slides. Better unmute you too, Paula. I'm seeing a few people with raised hands. If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we're going to have time for a Q&A period when all three presentations are complete.
Okay, can you hear me? Excellent. Okay, so actually mine's going to be a little shorter because I think JP and I overlapped a little bit.
Yours is not quite in presentation mode yet.
It's not? Oh, okay. So it's presenting. Is it presenting the wrong?
We're just seeing the whole deck. So
okay.
It's not a huge problem.
Here, let's see if we can figure that out. Screen share. This one.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yay. A little better than my last presentation. Last presentation, I was like, abort. So JP talked about on the Canadian fuel regulation that there's 3 compliance categories. And this is the critical aspect that we as a solar industry need to be thinking about. Is there's actions. So category 1 is essentially reducing the carbon intensity of fossil fuel through the life cycle. And that's on the production of it. The second one is supplying low carbon fuels through blending. So this is ethanol, biodiesel, things like that. And the third one is switching to alternative sources of energy. So we're going to just talk about those 3 categories. So compliance category 1, 2, and 3. One's going to be easier to sort of get our heads around with regard to solar implementation. 2, maybe not as easy. And 3, there's definitely some out of the box thinking in that one. So compliance category 1, in the Canada Gazette, it's about 146 pages long. It's actually a pretty good read. I stayed awake through the whole thing. And they actually give some estimates of how many compliance credits are expected for each of the categories. And I think it's worthwhile to go in and have a look at those. So for category 1, they expect only about 0.6 million compliance credits per year for 2026 and 2040. So some of them are from Alberta and Saskatchewan for reduced methane flaring, and carbon capture, utilization, and storage is expected to provide 3 million credits. So you're kind of, well, how do I play as a solar project? Well, this is how you play. So before you had a refinery or an upgrader, and it's connected to the grid. There's my little grid there on the right-hand side. And now what I do is I actually stick a solar facility directly connected to the refinery or the upgrader. And so essentially what I'm doing is I'm offsetting part of the electricity that's coming from the grid. So, well, has anybody thought of this? Apparently so. So Shell Scotford just this week have just submitted to the AUC a 5 megawatt solar facility that would be connected behind the fence to Shell Scotford. And so I went into their noise impact assessment and I pulled out this little map. And it shows where the proposed solar facility is. And this is all public information. And the refinery is just south of it, but it's on the refinery lands and it would be connected into the refinery. So that will reduce the carbon emission intensity of the fuel produced at the refinery. So that's a pretty innovative aspect for using land that's in and around the refinery. So somebody was asking me before, where's the best place to put a solar facility in Alberta? Where's the best opportunity? And I said, beside a refinery, beside a petrochemical, beside any of an upgrader, that's the best place right now to put a solar facility based on the clean fuel regulation that is expected in 2022. So this one is quite interesting. This one, I believe, has been in the works for a little while, and they've got 5 megawatts connecting behind the fence. Another one is, imagine on the left-hand side, this is a well pad. And again, it's drawing electricity from the grid. So the after would be solar directly connected to the well pad that's offsetting power that's coming from the grid. Who's done this before? Actually, it's been done before. So this is Imaginea. They did a solar powered pump jack in Alberta. It was 200 kilowatts. And I think it was done probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago. At that time, the solar modules had lower efficiency than what they have now. So you might start to see a lot more solar powered pump jacks or well pads. And again, it needs to be behind the fence so that it is reducing the carbon intensity of the produced fuels. So this is one that was done, yeah, many years ago, and it certainly had a lot of notoriety for doing it, but this will become, I think, more commonplace in the future. Another one is for off-grid. So if you have a lot of well pads are not connected to the grids, and they're essentially their lift station is propane or natural gas. And this would be using solar to either augment or replace the power that's required for the lift in the well pad. So this is just another idea in order to how to deal with off-grid. You could also do wind or wind plus solar or wind plus solar plus battery for any of the off-grid, and essentially you're removing the fossil fuels that are being used for the lift station. Now we go into category 2. So this is low carbon fuels. I'm going to flip through this one because we already chatted a little bit about it. This is really about ethanol, biodiesel, and what you can do is from an ethanol refinery, which we have some in Alberta, is you would have reduced electricity grid consumption, and instead you would have your solar facility providing electricity to the ethanol refinery. So it's reducing the amount of electricity it's taking from the grid. So again, the idea is about displacement of the grid electricity in this point. And this would be, again, behind the fence for ethanol refinery or biodiesel. Category 3, this is a little bit more complex. So how does solar fit in here? This one is really about displacing things at the use point. So it's either electric vehicles or for hydrogen. And I'm actually going to scoot along to this one. So before you have hydrocarbon fuels and you're powering a car that looks like it's getting rained on, it's not. It's just having gasoline fueled or diesel fueled. And what it would be is a fleet substitution or a car substitution where now you have a hydrogen car that's getting hydrogen fuel that has gone through electrolysis and power is being supplied by solar power. And so this would reduce the carbon intensity of the hydrogen fuel because you would essentially be swapping out from the hydrocarbon fuels to the hydrogen. And so that's how it would play in this role. That's all I have. I've got my contact details there if anybody's got questions after. And I'm going to pass this over now to Maureen.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Try and unmute you there, Maureen.
Awesome. Here we go. Okay, are you able to see the screen okay? Okay, thank you, Heather and Paula and JP, and welcome everybody. So I'm going to take it down a slightly different path, as I know JP and Paula were going to dive into the specifics. And I thought I would just start by kind of highlighting Alberta Innovates at sort of a high level, because I wasn't sure how many people on the call would really be sort of familiar with the organization and sort of the innovation ecosystem as a whole. And so Alberta Innovates, we are essentially the research and innovation arm for the Alberta government. We are a Crown corporation, so we are independent, but we do tend to align our priorities based on sort of, I would say, the priorities of the provincial government. But because we're arm's length, we are able to take a longer term point of view as well, and just allow for just a bit more flexibility, recognizing that innovation, you can get some things done short term, but most of it is a little bit more longer term focus. And so we do have 2 research subsidiaries, INNOVATES Alberta, as well as C4 Technologies. In the last year, we put in invested about just under 200 million into different research and innovation projects. We've got about 550 employees. Again, that includes both within Alberta Innovates and our research subsidiaries, and we're pretty broadly located. across Alberta. So as any organization and any funding organization will tell you, you never have enough funds to put towards everything you would love to invest in. And so as a corporation, we really try to look at sort of what are those key areas that we feel we can really be impactful in. And so we have sort of 5 primary investment areas, and all of this is available within our business plan if you're wanting to dive deeper. And I'd say sort of, you know, from a sector perspective, really where we've chosen to focus is around sort of that digital health and looking at sort of how this can accelerate some of the improvement in quality and long-term sustainability of the health system within Alberta and also the health of Albertans. We also then focus within sort of the clean resources technologies, and this is a fairly broad area, but you think about sort of the strengths that we have within this province, whether it's, you know, hydrocarbon-based, renewable-based, agriculture and forestry, and really sort of looking at how we can continue to have that play a significant role within the province and also do it in a sustainable manner. We do recognize also that smart agriculture and the opportunity to use research and innovation really to address some of the food security is a key issue. And then that component of artificial intelligence and environment, entrepreneurial ecosystem really helps support the moving of these sort of focus areas. And from there, again, we are a technology sort of development and knowledge dissemination sort of focus. And so we've got these core technology areas, which really relate to data-enabled innovation, digital technology for business transformation, the broad sector of clean technology, as well as innovative production and distribution. So then a lot of people sort of ask, well, you know, where within the innovation space does Alberta Innovates play? And we're really quite all-encompassing through various different divisions within our organization and in the way that we sort of set up different types of programs. And so when we think about Alberta Innovates, I feel like we've really got sort of 3 sort of key primary areas that we focus on. And that's really around, you know, primarily being a funder and or a service provider, and that service provider coming through our research subsidiaries. And this allows us really to support technology development, research, innovation. We also are a partner and a collaborator. And so this is an opportunity to work with various stakeholders to make connections that are really needed to allow for innovation to really be successful in a broader sort of sense. And finally, we're a convener and a connector. And so again, connecting those people, you know, bringing together, you know, consortiums that might be needed to really accelerate the deployment of new technologies and innovations within the province. So just a couple of things I thought I'd touch on. I know we don't have a ton of technology developers on the call, but for those that are here, I'm just going to dive into sort of some of the support that we really have on that entrepreneurial or innovation development kind of scale. So one of the really interesting things I feel that Alberta has relative to other provinces in Canada is we have this great innovation network that is spread out across the province. That really allows us to support sort of the entrepreneurial community and provide different programs and services to accelerate sort of the growth of technology, but also to help disseminate some of the knowledge that has been driven. And these networks are supported and ran through our entrepreneurial investments division within Alberta Innovates. Similarly, that division would have a number of different specific programs that are targeted at Alberta-based small and medium enterprises, so SMEs. And these are really intended to sort of help Alberta SMEs advance technology and innovation right from sort of some of those what we'll call idea stages, you know, through to kind of getting it into that establishing or sort of towards it being commercially available for production. And so a number of programs listed here, again, on the website, much more information with contact information of who you can get a hold of in order to hear more about this. So then, as Heather noted, I'm part of the Clean Resources team or a division within Alberta Innovates. And so I just want to take a moment here and really kind of talk about what we focus on. And I think this will probably be most applicable to those that are on the call. And so within, again, the clean resources area, we've got an advanced hydrocarbons group, a clean technology, which I would be part of, and environmental innovation, bioindustrial materials, smart ag and food, and then the Prion Research Institute as well. And really what we focus on within Alberta Innovates, within the clean resources team, is looking at technologies and innovations that are at that applied research stage through to sort of your first field demonstration. And so for a lot of the developers here who are utilizing commercially available technology, not a great fit for clean resources. And I would say also not a great fit for our sister organization, Emissions Reduction Alberta, who really kind of focus on technology innovation at sort of that first field demonstration to first commercial deployment. And so, when you're looking at sort of the opportunities, I would say within the solar space for innovation, it's got to be things that have not yet been done before. And so, there would be examples, I would say particularly with, ERA, Emissions Reduction Alberta, where they've supported solar in the past. So when the Brooks Solar project came about, it was the first utility solar project within the province. And so again, it was the first of its kind. And so that's sort of where the innovation space really can help to kind of get it through that last hurdle. But once it's been out there and demonstrated, then the innovation space is not really the place to kind of get the support that you're looking for. Unless, again, you're doing something more innovative. Are you incorporating new technologies into a solar facility that might help with O&M? Are you, moving away from sort of utility style solar into more building integrated opportunities where we know that that's not a space that's been broadly deployed yet? And I would even say things, like microgrids are something that there's a lot of conversation around, but yet haven't really been broadly deployed. And so it's really about thinking about your project and saying, is there something new here that has a bit of a technology risk that would warrant sort of that support from an innovation organization like Alberta Innovates or ERA that you're looking to get help in de-risking. And any project that we're looking to support really has to have some alignment to priorities that we're looking for, or impacts that we're really looking to achieve within the province. And those are things around, economic diversification, job creation. How do we allow our resources to remain sustainable? Within that clean tech sector, we're really recognizing that it's also about the export opportunity. So what is the export market that might be available for you as sort of a clean tech developer that's based here in the province? It's also tied to those environmental impacts. So whether that's GHG, water use, technologies related to tailings reduction, well site reclamation has become a big conversation for us, as well as sort of biodiversity. And within Alberta Innovates, we do have two different mechanisms in which we can really advance some of these strategic areas that we've noted, and that's through a continuous intake. And so at any time that you have a project idea, you can reach out and potentially apply for funding. Or we do targeted calls where we see an area that we really want to get a sense of what is the overall innovation in this space that we want to target and allow for people to apply for. And so one of those examples would be the most recent tier calls that Alberta Innovates did in the fall, and that ERA is now currently doing as well. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on the clean technology team, because I think, again, this will be most applicable to the group that we have here today. And in particular, so we've got sort of a focus in the areas of waste management and renewable fuels, emerging electricity generation. So again, this is like things like we could say geothermal, as it's yet to be broadly deployed in Alberta, or even I would say Canada as a whole. So things like commercial solar would not be something that would fit sort of within that emerging electricity generation bucket. Grid modernization, and this is a pretty all-encompassing one. So this would be things like smart grid, energy storage, microgrids, more distributed generation. But again, doing distributed generation, not in the conventional sense of just attaching, a solar farm to the distribution grid, but what's the innovative aspects there that we're looking for, as well as sort of carbon capture, utilization and storage, hydrogen, and then sort of a clean tech metals and materials. And so again, here, recalling that our focus is really around that applied research to sort of first field demonstration is where we sit if you're like developing or deploying a technology. But the other aspect that we really do is around knowledge generation and knowledge dissemination. And so a lot of these emerging technologies or solutions in this space, you know, is there an opportunity to bring a group of industry players together where there's a common, you know, question that's out there that really hasn't been solved yet, sort of from that technical point of view, that would really allow the industry as a whole to advance. And so I think some of the opportunities that, you know, the CFR and the carbon pricing, you know, that JP alluded to is, you know, these industries that are going to now be impacted by that are going to be looking for solutions. And what is the opportunity for innovation companies like Alberta Innovates, like ERA, to really sort of help support the development and demonstration to really meet some of those requirements that are going to be needed going forward. And so I'll leave it there. Again, some good contact information and links for those that are interested for some follow-up. So Heather, I'll pass it back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm just gonna share my screen briefly before our Q&A just to, okay, can you all still hear me? Excellent. So yeah, thank you very much for those presentations. We covered a lot of information in a short time, and I appreciate that. Just as a reminder to our audience, for our Q&A, please enter your questions in the Q&A chat box, and you can also vote other people's questions up. I see there are 3 already there, and so if other people have questions, don't hesitate to add them. We do have our presenters here with us until 1:15 today, so we are able to answer quite a few questions. I'm going to stop my screen sharing, so hopefully you can see all of our presenters today. And I'll have them just take a stab at a few of these initial questions in the Q&A box with me. So here we have Todd wondering, are there any 5 to 10-year forecasts for grid intensity factors in Alberta, given that currently it's a 0.57 kilograms per kilowatt hour? Anyone want to take a stab at that question? All right, Paula, please, let's unmute you. Oops, sorry, I think I asked you to unmute right when you unmuted yourself, causing chaos. You're gonna have to unmute again.
Okay. So that's a really great question. My understanding is that there was a draft in 2018, there was a draft electricity grid displacement factor calculation that was put out, and that the timing for the new electricity grid displacement factor may actually be launched in January of 2022. So just coming up very shortly. There is some discussion on, they have some calculations in there for what it might be. The other one that I find is a little bit, so there is some discussion also about increasing it not every 5 years, but increasing it every 2 years. But essentially they would give you a 2-year advance warning for what would be coming in 2 years. In terms of the forecast there, you would have to contract directly. We could do it for you for what that would be, because it's all going to be based on that build margin. So the build margin is going to be the key one for what you feel is going to be included in what development will happen in the future. There's a couple of key questions on that. One is, how is coal to gas treated? And the second one is, how is the wind power that has contracts under reset treated when all of the emission reductions in that is actually already used as part of it? So there, I've actually submitted some questions into Alberta Environment to find out some of those questions, because those will be key parameters on the build margin. The operating margin I would see is staying fairly stable over the coming years. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and for those people who are very new to this subject, would you mind just touching on what grid intensity factor means?
Sure.
So
the electricity grid and displacement factor is essentially saying, if I put a renewable energy megawatt hour on, what have I displaced? And the protocol behind it says, well, you've displaced both what was the last unit on for the operating margin, and you've also displaced what might be built. But going forward and trying to figure out what might be built is very difficult. So instead they go backwards and they look at either the last 20% of capacity that was built or the last 5 years of what the construction was, if there wasn't a big change in the last 20%. So it's the last 20% or the last 5 years, and that's called the build margin. And so for us, given the fact that we've had a lot of coal flipping over to gas, how will that be treated? Will it be considered gas, or will they be considered new under the build margin, or are they not considered in the build margin? So that's how electricity grid displacement factor works.
Interesting. Okay. And anything to add from our other presenters on that particular question, or shall we dive into the next one?
Yeah, not for me. Paula's the
right.
expert on that one.
Yeah, that's all good. So Joe is wondering how many credits are forecast for category 2 and 3 versus 0.6 for category 1. And that must have been a question out of one of your presentations. Okay, let's see. Here we go, JP. What do you want to say?
Okay, easiest for me to, I just quickly put together a slide on the fly. So this is right out of the, how many page, Paula?
146.
146 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to save you from having to comb through the entire 146 pages, here's right out of the Canada Gazette one, here's a figure, and I got a table for you here too. But yeah, so check out figure 5 in Canada Gazette 1. That shows you what they think are the trajectories for all three classes, all three categories of credits, how many per year. And so you got the curves there. And so this is category 2 credits. These are the biofuels. This is action somewhere along the life cycle. This is category 1. And then this down here, end use fuel switching is this one. This is something we didn't get into. These are the fund, compliance fund, and emerging technologies. But yeah, these are the 3 curves to take a look at. And then further than that, here's a table. So this is from table 15 and table 16 in there, and they break it down on a per year basis where they think the how many credits will be generated and how many will be held in portfolio or banked. So yeah, I encourage you to take a closer look at the Gazette.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you putting together slides on the fly. That's great. So here we've got a question from Daniel. What will be the showstopper looking from the grid integration side of all those behind the fence projects in category 3? Are behind the fence possible at all downtown fueling stations? What do you say to that? All right, Paula first.
So on the EV side of things, right now we already have quite a few downtown EV charging stations. So really category 3 is about deployment of more infrastructure for charging stations. And in fact, they've got some complex things in there where the credits actually flow back into actually reinvestment in infrastructure. From a grid point of view, it's really quite specific to whatever site it is. If you've got high generation at one particular location, then adding load to it is not going to be difficult. If you have high load and low generation nearby, then it may be more difficult. But the infrastructure that's required has been increasing significantly. There are a number of charging providers out there. So the biggest ones are ChargePoint and Flow. So they're the 2 top ones in Canada at the moment. BC Hydro has done some stuff with Flow, and Circuit Electric has also done it in Quebec. So there doesn't seem to be too many issues with regard to showstopper. It's going to be very much on a site specific as to whether or not can connect at those locations. If that, okay. Any other comments from Maureen or JP?
Yeah, I would agree. It's actually integrating panels at each refill station is probably out of economics at the moment. where it might be really interesting is solar to hydrogen. So creating green hydrogen, which would generate a category 3 credit as well. Yeah, green hydrogen is going to be a really interesting space this decade as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question I think mostly targeted at you, Maureen. What role do you see retired landfills playing in sync with solar? Would that be considered innovative to be working with a landfill?
So in the general sense, I'm assuming you mean innovative in potentially receiving innovation funding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might struggle with that one. I think utilizing landfills for solar or other type of brownfield for solar, I think is a great opportunity, just generally speaking. Because then again, you're not, maybe potentially, there's always that conversation when it comes to solar of, are you utilizing, cropland, or even if it's grasslands, there's still a purpose for that. But if it's been a greenfield or a brownfield site that had already been used for something else, and here's an opportunity to continue using that sort of in a solar application, I think that's great. From an innovation point of view, so from an Alberta Innovates point of view, whether or not it would be a fit, I not to play that game, but it is really sort of project dependent. But overall, probably not, unless there's something more than just putting sort of commercially available solar onto that site.
Right, because in some ways landfill has been done before, right? Like Calgary did that. But I see an interesting top up on this question. Alan has said, how about on top of tailings ponds? Is that new enough? Have we had a first of its kind? I think we're all reading and kind of jealous of those provinces that aren't landlocked, because maybe they can throw some solar up on the ocean. But we've got tailings ponds. So would that be a direction we could go?
My comment on that is, do you really want to do that? Part of the issue is the corrosive nature of the tailings ponds, and you're now putting electrical equipment, generating equipment on top. I'm like, I don't think I want to do that.
And I think we'd still have challenges around, solidifying tailings ponds, right? I think ultimately what they're trying to do is actually reclaim them, so that you could actually put it back to sort of the natural environment and stuff like that. And so, the tailings pond, that is still a challenge that I would say we have, even beyond just sort of looking at sort of the solar opportunity around that one.
Yeah, so maybe solidify that pond into a landfill and then put some panels on it. I actually remember editing a paper on how to solidify tailings ponds about 15 years ago. So definitely a challenging subject to delve into. Here's another question we've got from Julie. To all panelists, what do you see are the biggest challenges moving beyond the innovation stage and moving into a commercialized product service in our current market in Alberta? For example, we have the technology, but barriers still remain with policy, business models, culture, etc. So that's a broader question. Yeah,
Broader
Paula.
question. And maybe it's because I'm in a bubble, but I don't see a lot of barriers. Like, a lot of our clients are installing utility scale solar, utility scale wind in Alberta, and we're not seeing a technology issue because the technology is mature, both for wind and solar. Energy storage is maturing significantly. Currently, we're working on the world's largest energy storage facility in California. I would say for energy storage, there's slightly more barriers for sure. But for wind and solar, we don't really have huge barriers at the moment. It's commercially proven technology. From a culture point of view, I don't know, maybe I'm in a bubble, but
well, I think
people I work with like it.
I think the place that question takes me, like when you mentioned the storage piece, right? Because a lot of people are looking to storage and expanding that. A lot of jurisdictions are saying, let's move on storage so we can have our reliability in our grid. But I can't tell you how many times I've heard Albertans say we have to continue to to move on natural gas for reliability. They seem to have a different approach to reliability in our province. And so I guess that's maybe a culture piece, is how fast can we move on some of these innovations if we're still hung up on natural gas giving us our reliability.
And that's an interesting point. I have had some good discussions with some of the ISO players when they hear those comments, they usually say, oh, everybody's a power engineer these days. Whereas, so reliability is a very complex subject. Reliability on the grid is based on multiple regulations, multiple generators, and an efficient market. And so we have that here today. I think if you're getting to 100% renewable energy, you're going to have some barriers. There's going to be curtailment will be a key part of that, and energy storage requirements will increase. But I mean, there's some jurisdictions are getting to 50% by 2040 or 50% by 2030. And we're learning a lot from those jurisdictions, but we're not anywhere close to hitting those kind of levels of integration issues, not compared to those that are doing 100% by 2030 or 2050. Yeah.
Anything to add on the challenges sort of
Yeah.
topic?
The challenge topic right now, I think, for energy storage is really whatever the bulk and regional tariff will be for demand transmission service. And will it put, and I would say two things, will it essentially make energy storage uneconomic? And the second one is, will it make EV charging stations uneconomic? So whatever happens, and it's underway at the moment with the Alberta Utilities Commission, is what happens with that bulk and regional tariff will be interesting to see how it plays out for how it affects load and how it affects energy storage.
Anything to add on this topic, JP, Jeff, or Maureen?
Yeah, thanks, JP. So I think it's a very open-ended question, and I don't think there's one answer that will address it, because it's going to be very technology and innovation dependent. And I would say that you always see this. I remember a colleague once saying to me, the technology is the easy part, and the rest, so the business models, the regulations, the policy, the adoption is the hard part. And it's a little bit of a process, but I think as Paula has alluded to, as you start to get some traction on these technologies, you start to get, large industry players or multitude of players interested in it, you start to see some of that policy, some of that regulations starting to shift. So whether that's, the ASO with their various working groups that they have going on related to energy storage, whether that's around, the AUC and some of the distribution inquiries that they've been doing. And so, I think it's about, as these projects are being developed, and I would say if I think about it from an Alberta Innovates point of view, this is where that knowledge dissemination is so key. Because when you're doing these projects that are focused on the technology innovation itself, what we're really looking for is the learning. What are some of those barriers that are coming out that we can start to disseminate, that we can start to share, that we can discuss with, government folks, with regulators, and really help to advance that and help to break down some of those barriers to allow for sort of more broader commercialization. But in terms of, like the specific Alberta regulations or policies that we have right now, I think it's very, innovation dependent. And so I'd hate to say one blanket statement for all technologies.
JP, Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that we've moved beyond the innovation stage. We're in a deploy for an awful lot of the solar here, no question. The large projects are financing on a merchant basis, which is a complete changer. And so when you've got things like a trajectory for 10 years up to $170 per ton on an offset, and potentially similar to that from a federal clean fuel standard, and multiple programs rolling out, and low cost money from Canada Infrastructure Bank and other thing. That was the whole purpose of my stacked pancake, was that you add all those together and you get an economic project. So we're in a different space now than we were just even 6 months ago, with a line of sight on a very good offset price, and potentially the same from a clean fuel standard. And so if you attach these to facilities that are looking to reduce their emissions and generate offsets and generate CFR credits and others, it gets to be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think if I remember, some of our presenters from the solar show recently were saying, with proven technologies alone and what's happening already in the sector commercially, we can probably get to 90% renewables on the grid, no problem. Where Alberta Innovates funding and pieces really come in is probably finding that last 10% of grid reliability. And that's where I think a lot of people are looking to hydrogen and green hydrogen and some of those more complex energy storage pieces and whatnot for that sort of the last hurdles that we'll have to overcome down the road. I like how long-term your organization thinks, Maureen. It's interesting to have folks who have a vision beyond just the upcoming 3 or 4 years. So that's helpful for us, I think. I have one last question here, but then I still have quite a few that I want to cover. I hope you don't mind. Your presentations really got me thinking, but first I want to ask Adrian's question. Would you say a downstream player is more aligned with category 1 or 3 credits? I'm going to take that, Paula. Okay, 1.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah. So downstream refining is going to be more aligned with category 1. And that's because they're trying to do everything they can on their life cycle to, so they would be anything that's using natural gas within the refinery. Maybe they're swapping it out to electrification of those heaters or whatever they're doing, but they're trying to decarbonize the life cycle process of production of liquid fuels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that. Category 1 is all about decarbonizing somewhere along the pathway of that gasoline or that diesel or that jet fuel. And so you can integrate solar at a few different spots along that pathway, which makes it really interesting. So here in Alberta, we got upgraders. You could do it on the upgrader, you could do it on the refinery, you could do it along the pipeline if there's a top up on pressure or other really interesting things. And so that would be a category 1 credit. Category 3 again is about fuel switch, so it's about electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. So a downstream player, Suncor, i.e. Petro-Canada, they're standing up EV charging stations all over the place. That's where they would play in the category 3 space. But yeah, Paula's right. It's from a large facility perspective, it would be category 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that maybe brings me to a question I had about, matchmaking. Like, how do you, let's say you're a solar industry person and you want to insert yourself into the O&G sector. Do you just have to go and hit up all the big companies and basically see if they are looking to hire an installer, or is there some kind of matchmaking service out there that can basically pair you with appropriate folks who might be looking for behind the scenes or behind the meter solar?
There's no matchmaking service to say.
Unfortunately,
Typically what will be done, because the solar facility and it's on the refinery's land, it will typically be owned by the refinery, and that's going to be the simplest approach. And so they would then contract out for, hey, I need an EPC contractor, maybe I need some design work, I need somebody on the permitting regulatory, and so they would contract out for that work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think be aware of what kind of RFPs are being issued by
Mm-hmm.
your refining sector.
Maybe the whole refining sector will start coming to the Solar Alberta website and entering their RFPs
That would work
there, because we have that service. It's like, actually, we could provide that service.
There you go.
On a smaller scale, I have had farmers call in, trying to figure out, they say, I've got brownfield. I don't want to pay for solar, but doesn't someone want to come lease my land from me to put up some solar here? And that's been another question, is how do we provide the matchmaking service for those guys who want to lease out their land? That's a side topic. I don't think it's really related to the clean fuels reg, but I keep wondering how many more matchmaking services we should be providing. It's good to hear Alberta Innovates is dabbling in that as well when it comes to big innovative projects and putting people together. So you have all talked a lot about solar being more proven these days. I think you called it mature. That was very respectful, Paula. It's no longer, we say something's mature instead of old, right? But I mean, Solar Alberta has been around for 30 years and solar technology has been around for like 50 or more, right? If I'm not mistaken. So we're not new and we're no longer risky. And nowadays, as you look at the volatility of the oil and gas sector in Alberta, I guess my question for you folks is, if solar industry folks decide to involve themselves in the ONG sector and sort of dabble in that world, are they exposing their companies to a lot of risk that they're not accustomed to? I'm kind of reversing it, right? It used to be the solar was the risky, but nowadays I feel like an exact opposite feels true.
So the oil and gas industry has been using solar integrated in their pipelines for chemical pumps along the pipelines, and they've been doing that for years. And it's usually maybe one or two modules that they'll have powering the chemical pump, and they'll have a little battery there in order to just keep the chemicals pumping into that. So oil and gas is not new to solar, and from a solar perspective, if you're doing EPC on it, frankly, you're just building it, and now the risk is borne by the refinery because they're paying lump sum or they're paying over a number of payments. But you're not now dependent on revenues coming from that solar facility in order for you to over the term of the asset that's now part of the refinery. So the refinery now has solar around it, and it's part of those assets. So I don't think you're exposing yourself to more risk. I think, frankly, there will be definite interest in oil and gas players in integrating solar. I think putting solar at compressor stations along a pipeline will be a key one. We have a lot of compressor stations. They use a lot of power, and that will be key. So I see those two industries as being quite symbiotic of how does solar provide cleaner electricity and help to drive down the carbon intensity of transportation fuels. I think it's awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and JP?
Yeah, two things. So first of all, I had a bullet in there, but I breezed right over it. So although the clean fuel regulation applies only to liquid fuels, they had for the 4 years of 3.5, 4 years of consultation proposed to also have regulation on gaseous fuels and on solid fuels, but they dropped that right at the Canada Gazette 1 stage. They have allowed those two fuel classes, gaseous and solid, to generate category 1 credits. So if a prospective solar business development team wanted to go out and talk to a facility that's on a gaseous stream or on the solid stream, they could also talk about integrating there too. So it's not just about refining and the liquid fuels and the end mineral fuels. Second of all, I'm going to do again. I'm going to just put on my slide here of this stacking. So this is exactly what I had in mind. The question was about integrating for fossil fuels. So as Paula said, these facilities are right now looking for opportunities like this. So they're under pressure, both from a price perspective, just as they're large emitters and they're exposed to price. They're under pressure from an end retail fuels perspective, from the clean fuel standards or the clean fuel regulation as it is now. And they're also feeling pressure from investors, from public and others. So this is the sort of thing that I would anticipate that some parties inside the fossil fuel companies, the refineries and others would be interested in. So there's the opportunity to stack a clean fuel regulation credit, an offset credit. There might be some funding. As well, they'd be lowering the greenhouse gas emissions from that facility itself. So that helps reduce exposure right there. And then the ESG positives. An awful lot of sustainability reports are out there where they have to report at AGMs on what their targets are and how they can meet their targets and others. And so integrating solar along the marginal lands like Shell, it appears, is looking to do is a great way to go. So I don't know of any matchmaking, but there's lots of opportunity for a solar business development team here, for sure.
Yeah, people are sure looking. I see the opportunities on your slide with your pancake model. I see the business opportunities. I see the sort of financial benefits. I guess the question from a greenhouse gas perspective on the pancake model is, is there a potential here to reduce the overall greenhouse, or to limit the number of greenhouse gases that we are ultimately taking out of the atmosphere if we're stacking all of these programs? Because can't you spread that money further and get more bang for your buck as a government? This is the perpetual question on stacking. And I wear two hats with Solar Alberta. Obviously, we're an industry hub, but we're also interested in climate change and greenhouse gas emission reductions. So what you're saying sounds amazing for industry, sounds amazing for the solar world. I'm questioning this pancake model when it comes to sort of getting your biggest bang for your buck with the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Do you see any issues there?
Yeah, so from an overall national inventory perspective, so the different regulations that are already in place and programming that's already in place have been factored into the Environment Canada models on where the greenhouse gas reductions are going to be realized. So the new measures that and programming they announced with the healthy environment and healthy economy and with the clean fuel regulations that came out, they've factored that all into their modeling, and yes, both of those will deliver and realize additional emission reductions.
Nice.
That's the question. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is always the perpetual question: is if we're trying to accomplish the economic goals and the environment goals at the same time, do they balance out? It's nice to hear that the modeling shows that they do, because that is, always the question: are we favoring one side over the other at the expense of the other? Maureen, you were thinking to add?
Well, I was just going to add, from potentially an innovation perspective, and I don't know if it totally ties in with your GHG question, but when we think about Alberta and Alberta's oil and gas resource, and in particular the oil sands, and how we can continue to lead in that space, some of the work that our advanced hydrocarbons team is looking at is around sort of, if we're moving away from fossil fuels, particularly in the transportation sector, what is that opportunity to maybe use our bitumen for something beyond combustion? So what we call our VDC program, right? And so it's so from your GHG point of view, if you're no longer burning it or combusting it, but you're converting it into some other kind of useful product, does that also help in sort of that balancing of those GHG emissions, right? And so if you can get a handle on the upstream side in terms of, potentially reducing sort of the amount of GHGs that's used to produce our oil, and then also looking at the end product of it and utilizing it for something other than sort of transportation fuels, then that's also another avenue in which you can look that could be of benefit overall.
Mm-hmm. I really like that you had that slide, JP, with the open box, because I feel that is a nice entrance to where Alberta Innovates is at, is, if you want to get creative and think about some alternative strategies, you've got that freedom right now. I guess we have time for maybe one last question. And I'm going to ask something because I think a lot of people are embarrassed to ask this question, but I know that a lot of people don't really understand what offsets are. And you were talking about credits versus offsets. And I just know that we're all supposed to know what the difference is, but the vast majority of us don't, and we're embarrassed to say it. So I'm going to be that person in the room. Could you guys just cover, what is the difference between a credit versus an offset? When would you go for one over the other in your modeling? What would be the reason you'd want to set up your business in one way to go for the offsets versus the credits? I don't know, JP, you want to do a broad overview of credit versus offset? I know your presentation touched on that, and they're being treated differently in the regs, right?
Yeah, so credit is an umbrella term. And underneath credit, there's multiple different types of credits, both provincially and federally and elsewhere. So credit's kind of a catch-all word. An offset is, well, maybe we'll change it. So an emission performance credit, one of those credits underneath the umbrella, is when there's an obligated party like a refinery or say a natural gas fired electricity generator or other that puts out lots of GHGs, they have a reduction requirement on those GHGs. And if they overperform and reduce more than they really had to, that overperformance gets quantified and turned into one type of credit called an emission performance credit. An offset credit is when there's a reduction by a non-regulated party, like solar, where there is no reduction obligation and they voluntarily reduce the GHGs that would have been going to atmosphere, displace it or other, and you can quantify that environmental goodness and becomes an offset credit. Then another kind of credit is, say in BC, there's the low carbon fuel standard credits. Federally, we've been talking about the clean fuel regulation credits, and there's credits all over the place, but they're all underneath that one umbrella. The two that we're most used to here in Alberta are the emission performance credits, or the EPCs, and offsets.
Mhm. Mhm.
My fellow panelists, if you've got anything to add to that, please.
It is a question I get all the time, particularly, and then also a comparison of what is a REC compared to an offset, what is an emission reduction, what's an environmental attribute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talk to somebody in an industry, you'll be fine.
Mhm.
You'll get the money. It's okay.
Yeah. They'll tell you the best way to get the money, right? Yeah, and that's
if you
really
do something environmentally good, there's a way to quantify that.
You'll be fine.
Yeah. The industry folks, the consultants will be able to figure out which quantification gets you the biggest bang for your buck.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and I tell that to folks at the microgen level too. I've got a lot of homeowners who will call me and they'll be like, "What's better? Is it better if I do, should I spend more money on more panels up front and maybe produce enough?" Anyways, they have all these questions. And I say, you know what? Your installer is actually going to, as you get your quotes, they'll give you a breakdown of where you're going to see your biggest bang for your buck. You don't actually have to know all that right up front. That's sort of why we have these industry professionals. So it's good for everybody on the line to know who they can reach out to for some of those detailed analysis, and to have your faces here today. And thank you for providing contact information as well. I want to give a huge thanks to all of you. You covered a lot of ground in a short time, and quite a variety of questions. So I really appreciate you coming together today and educating us all on these important regulations and opportunities here in Alberta. So thank you, all three of you, very much. And thanks to all our attendees as well. We hope you can join us for more of our solar seminar series. In particular, I think I mentioned at the outset, but I'll mention again, you can register now for our upcoming seminar, which is being held, of course. Oh, my papers are all over the place, but we have our next seminar coming up on May 13th with the City of Edmonton. So please register now. And thank you again to Solus for sponsoring us today, and to all our presenters. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Ciao.
Thanks.